I'm going to introduce our first speaker with 3 fun facts. So our first speaker grew up on a dairy farm, and to this day, she can teach you how to milk a cow. She has a thing for ice cream, and she went to the Museum of Ice Cream, and she's still picking out sprinkles from crevices. And she's no stranger to psychedelic drugs. She has... You have the best laugh. She has actually done Toad in Topanga. That's super interesting. Everybody, please help me welcome Brandi.
Hey guys, so I actually didn't write those facts earlier, but Lori, our communications manager, did, and then we were running super behind, so I was like, just send them out. And now I feel super, super vulnerable about them as well. They're all super true. Lori knows me better than anybody. So yeah, I'm Brandi, and I'm the founder of EVIO Beauty, and I usually pitch and public speak about EVIO Beauty, so I feel super vulnerable tonight, but because I'm not really going to tell you anything about EVIO Beauty, so if you don't know, you're going to learn what I do and what I created by my fuck-ups, and there's a plethora of them, so I'm going to try to fit within my time frame as well. And by Winston Churchill's definition, I'm super, super successful according to Winston Churchill because I'm really good at being super enthusiastic about my plethora of fuck-ups. So, except for this one time. So this one time I was not so enthusiastic about this particular fuck-up. And I'm going to tell you the story that led me to this one fuck-up that I was not so enthusiastic about. So my first super enthusiastic fuck-up was when I was 14. I dropped out of school, and so I don't have an education actually past high school, or past 14, so not even to high school. I did end up going back and getting my high school diploma, but in a very unconventional way. I mailed in little modules I had to do. But when I was 14, I dropped out of school and became a competitive ice dancer. By the 2004-2005 season, I was on the Junior Olympic team. I had a really I'll call it colorful upbringing. So it wasn't necessarily odd for me to drop out of school. My parents weren't very involved, and this just became my career. In fact, I thought my career was going to be Belle from Beauty and the Beast on Disney on Ice. So I was like, this makes sense. Drop out of school and start my career now. It didn't work out. My partner, who I was on the Junior Olympic team with, we skated with each other since I was 10. He ended up quitting the year that we made the Junior Olympic team. It was too much for him, and he wanted to go back to school. So I then moved to Vancouver. I was then 17, just turned 17, and I was like, this makes sense. So I got in my Hyundai Accent with pink flames on the side of it and drove to Vancouver. And I got an apartment off of Craigslist. It was my first time using Craigslist. And is anybody from British Columbia here? All right. So you're going to be the only ones who understand this. The apartment was in Whalley, Surrey, and yep, and it was a 2-bedroom, and it cost me all of I think $600, and I didn't think it was strange that this guy wanted cash. So I get there, and then I also find out there's a thing called hydro, which I didn't know what that was, and I couldn't set it up because I wasn't of age. So I convinced my neighbor to do that for me, and this is how I got through most of my young adult life until I started working at a modeling agency, and while I was working there, I built my way up. It was based on commission, so if my models weren't working, I didn't eat. So I became very good at hustling and very good at this. I predominantly managed models throughout Asia, throughout China and Japan, but all from my computer, so I didn't visit those countries early on within that. And then I got into a relationship with somebody who was an entrepreneur. And he did incredibly well as an entrepreneur, but he struggled with addiction, and it quickly got the best of him. and I found myself living in a shelter when I was 21 with nothing but $15 and a laptop after escaping a very unhealthy, abusive relationship. But while I was there, with my computer, I photoshopped this catalog. It doesn't look like much, but what I actually did was I looked up pictures on Google of makeup, and then I put it into Photoshop, and I put my own logo on it, and then I made this catalog, and I walked around to stores and sold them this makeup that didn't yet exist. And to my surprise, people bought it, and this is not a story of fraud, so I did discover how to actually make the makeup. In fact, I sold a lot of it. And I started employing women in the shelter as well. So my first employees ever were these 3 women who were struggling from losing their homes or addictions or leaving relationships, and I would employ them in the basement of the shelter. I didn't live in the shelter anymore at this time. This actually was at the same time as I was living in the shelter. And the reason why I wanted to explain this is because I really believe in breaking stigmas, and often you don't know what's going on in someone's life. I was on the red carpet, actually, of this show that I was working on, Arctic Air, and you would have never guessed that I didn't have a home to go to that night. This was the makeup that ended up actually coming to be. So it was in the catalog. It was initially called Karma Face. Now my company is called EVIO Beauty, and this was part of the fuck up. I did not know what trademarking was. And my ex actually trademarked Karma Face Cosmetics and then sued me for infringement and won. So he was actually awarded 20% of my company, and I had to share it with him until he then sold the trademark to one of our major competitors, which is a very large cosmetic company, who then sued me in Supreme Court. Well, I got a lawyer. So I was 21 at this point, and I got a lawyer, and she knew my ex as well, and he was a pretty predominant business person. He started a company that is now one of the largest production companies in the world, and she said, you know, you're not going to win this. He's going to continue to bury you in legal fees, and you have nothing as is, so, you know, just give him what he wants. While I was walking home that day, there was actually a sticky note on the side of my building where I lived in a really nice condo at this point, but I had no furniture in it because I couldn't really afford it. I just felt like I needed to surround myself with good environment and I would get there. But I had nothing in this very nice apartment. But there was a sticky note, and to this day, I do not know who put it there or why it was there, but it said, "Stay strong." So I went upstairs, fired my lawyer, and started over again. And this is EVO. And this was the best thing that ever happened from those accumulated fuck-ups, because EVO now, with that $15 in the shelter, we've now grown it to an over $15 million company in 5 years. But not without a whole bunch more fuck-ups after founding EVO. So after all that, we got this actual particular fuck up. At this point, I was not so enthusiastic about fucking up. I was pretty, at this point, you know, at some point, although you're very resilient, you get to a point where you're like, you get knocked down, you're like, I'm just gonna lay here on the mat for a bit, like I'm done. This was that point for me. So I had just sold 70,000 blushes to Birchbox. And this was, we were running super behind on manufacturing because that is not my strong suit. I could sell anything to anyone at this point, but making it was a little bit more difficult. So we were super far behind on this. I was still, at this point, a one-woman show, and I actually did manufacturing through a third party in Miami. So I flew all the way down to Miami, rented this pickup truck, convinced the manufacturer to give it to me without paying because I didn't have enough to pay him because I hadn't gotten paid yet, because usually there's 60 days net, all that kind of stuff. So I convinced him to give it to me, put it in his pickup truck, couldn't afford transportation, so I drove it from Miami to Tennessee without stopping. It's about like a over 10-hour drive, like 13-hour drive, I think it was, with a lot of gummy bears and a lot of Red Bull. And then when I got to Birchbox, they were like, we've never accepted a shipment from a pickup truck. Like our dollies, like our equipment doesn't work that way. So box by box, I brought it into their warehouse. And at this point, like I was done. But somebody got their hands on one of those products that was in Birchbox, and they were actually the founder of a company called Credo. His name was Sashi. He actually unfortunately passed away about almost 2 years ago now, but he was on the founding member of Sephora. And he then created a kickoff of Sephora called Credo. And he put our line front and center in every single one of their stores. So at this point still, I was very broke, still paying off lawyers actually, and I used my last $240 to fly down to the first Credo launch in Soho, where I stayed in a hostel and ate very cheap pizza at Prince Pizza, which is the best pizza in New York. And I then show up to the launch as if nothing's going on, had a one-way ticket, so didn't even know how I was getting home from New York. And we ended up actually getting interviewed by the New York Times and by a plethora of other media as well, and continued to grow the company from there. Shortly after that, the world's largest skincare manufacturer invested in us too, because I did it again, but this time I pre-sold 277,000 green tea primers, and the world's largest skincare amenity manufacturer took note of that and invested in us. Shortly after that, Sephora also made us their only Canadian member in their cohort last year. And then shortly, and I missed one too, right before that one actually, we signed our first contract with Breakwater Venture Capitalists and got venture capitalist funding as well. And then Sephora, shortly after Sephora, Aurora approached us about doing their topicals and partially acquired our company earlier in 2018. So we're now their global exclusive partner for all things cannabis topicals. And then leading me to the last fuck up that happened not so long ago that just kind of gives the drastic differences as to what kind of fuck ups now have been occurring. So a couple months ago after the Aurora acquisition, I got a very random phone call saying, "We'd love for you to come and talk about your story and merging of beauty and cannabis at someone's house for a dinner." So I said, okay, had no idea where I was going, because if you've noticed a pattern in my life, I don't do a lot of research. So I just do it. And actually, I'm very grateful that I haven't researched it, because if I knew, I probably would not have done it. So I get on a plane, go down to LA, this time stay in a very nice hotel, and things are a bit different, and a limo car comes to pick me up, and we're in the car, and I ask where we're going, and they said, "You're having dinner at Jim Belushi's house." And I was like, that's really, really random. So I'm Googling, being like, who's Jim Belushi? And his brother, John Belushi, comes up, who, if you're familiar with, was one of the first SNL people. And so when I get there, I'm like, my driver was very confused because John has passed away. So I don't know whose house I'm at. Really had no idea. And then when I did find out, I was super nervous. And so I had to go to the washroom before I went to speak in front of all these people who I just recognized who they are. And so I butt in front of the line, because there was just one washroom at the pool house. And I butt in front of them, and this person's not so happy about that. And in fact, he was quite upset about it. And I find out afterwards that he's one of the UFC champions. So fuck-ups have changed a little bit as to what they were before to what they are now. But I only got there from some amazing people, and this is only some of them because this was a picture taken a while ago, but we have an amazing team now, and not only are they a team within our company, but they've drastically changed my life in so many ways. It's a lot easier to get ahead when you have strong people behind you. And at that too, we now, it's been incredibly helpful to have not only the team behind us, but to have really a world movement behind it as well. We're now distributed throughout the US, Canada, and Australia, as well as the EU. And we've gotten a lot of support from the press, including some 30 under 30 lists, which was a huge goal of mine at the time when I was in the shelter. And we're just super, super grateful for how much life has changed so quickly. And it all came from the initial fuck up of dropping out of school to become Belle from Beauty and the Beast.
Wow, Brandi, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's such an incredible and unique story. And I think it could be summed up by that post-it that you had in one of the slides. So stay strong, whatever you're going through, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And if Brandi was able to get through what she was going through, we can all do it. So thank you so much for sharing that. And let's open it up to some Q&A. So we're gonna have some mic runners, and who wants to kick us off with the first question?
What kept you motivated? Like, I know everyone probably has experienced this before, but like, it's like fuck up after fuck up, and then you just get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm gonna have a meltdown. What kind of kept you going throughout all this, like from start to finish kind of thing? Is there like one thing that you did that helped you like de-stress or something? Like, what kept you motivated?
Yeah, so I think part of it was like just being completely aware of how bad things can always get worse, but having lived kind of the colorful upbringing that I did and then living in a shelter, I think you know how bad things can be, and I think that it really motivated me I was like, I'm not going back to that, or that can't possibly be all that life is, or I kind of had two choices, like normalize that or make a new life out of it. And also something else I did was I also kind of convinced myself I wasn't doing it for me. So being in that situation where I was in a shelter surrounded by other people going through really challenging things, I thought that I could do something that would also motivate the people around it. I convinced myself it wasn't for me, it was for like the bigger movement and change and breaking these stigmas that were really becoming very dominant in my life, yeah.
Oh, hi.
Sure.
Oh,
Hey.
hi. I'm like almost in tears, and so is Erin, and so is Carolee. I'm also in the beauty industry. Just mad inspired. Question though, because I'm gonna play dumb. What advice would you give to someone who wants to hire somebody from a shelter?
Yeah, so I mean, the advice is just that I don't think that there is any advice, because I think that, I mean, I lived there and you saw, like, you would have never guessed. So I think that it's not really looking at it that way. You're just hiring somebody.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. Sorry, I'm over here.
Hey.
Hi. So when did you know that the fuck-ups were over? Like, when did you feel that you had turned the corner?
That is such a good question, because on Tuesday I had a really, really bad day. In fact, I split my pants, like the entire pants, in the middle of the bank while I was like not having a good time there at all. And so they're not over. and then I got back to the office and was like huffing and puffing and was like, oh my gosh, Lori, like today just keeps getting worse. Look, like so it's not over at all. I'm sure of it. But they just keep getting a little bit different, and I think kind of learning to like be excited by them a little bit. They keep you on your toes, and also I find that when fuck-ups happen, they make me really pissed off, and it motivates me to work harder. So I've kind of grown to appreciate them. They're definitely not over.
Got one over here. Back left corner to you. Oh, yeah. Right over here, Brent.
Okay.
Hey, what made you decide to cut your losses on the skating? When you moved out to Vancouver, I was thinking that was the direction this was going to go. I'm just curious when you decided, all right, kind of fuck this and on to the next thing.
Yeah, so I actually, I tried out for a couple other partners, and it didn't work out. They didn't want me. And I'm not a very good single skater. I need someone to throw me. So that was when I moved on, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right here at the front.
Okay,
no, I was just
very confusing. It's like, where's Waldo?
I was actually just wondering something on a much lighter note as to who was your ex. Like that is just,
Nah.
it's in my head. You didn't say it, and I was thinking, you know.
Nope.
So we're gonna
I don't want any more lawsuits.
We'll do one last question.
We got one right back here, Brandi, right where the previous one was. Yeah.
Thank you.
What was Toad like?
Oh my gosh, I don't think there's enough time for me to talk about this. They do like a pre-entry interview to see if you're like sound to endure this kind of thing. One, I didn't really understand the difference between plant medicine and like drugs until this experience. It's very much plant medicine, like it's not fun. But when they do the like entry interview, they ask if you like how you feel about death, like would you be okay dying tomorrow kind of thing. I think that's the only way in explaining it. Yeah, it's really, it was the biggest like life-changing experience, to be completely honest, but I wouldn't do it again, but I'm very grateful I did it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we'll cap it off there. Interesting place to end, but Brandi, thank you so much again for sharing your story. And for anybody whose question we didn't get to, the speakers are going to be sticking around after the end of the event, so you'll have a chance to speak to them one-on-one.